So I need y'all to know that today's project has been on my to-do list for a while now, and it's been there under the name Super Hot Sushi Chef. And depending on the image that came to your mind first, this next bit may disappoint you. Because ladies and gentlemen, this is Dev Diary, a series where I try to make my own video games, and not good-looking experts in the culinary field. So if you're new here and game dev videos are your thing, consider subscribing, and be sure to turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. So yeah, the player runs their own conveyor belt sushi joint. And as that lovely name should have suggested, the twist is that the gameplay was inspired by the game Super Hot. Now, in case you're not familiar with Super Hot, it's an action game where the player dictates the speed at which the level plays out. In other words, the game doesn't move until the player does. This gives the player the opportunity to assess their surroundings and plan the best sequence of events in order to survive. So to start, our player must construct some sushi, the ingredients of which can be found to the left of the screen. Hovering over the items will display the name and price for each ingredient, and side note, it's been forever since I've actually had sushi, so I have absolutely no idea how accurate these prices are. Anyway, assuming that the player can afford it, clicking on an ingredient will queue it in our sushi constructor. Once something has been added to the constructor, it cannot be removed. However, once a dish has been constructed, the player can discard the entire thing at the cost of the price of the ingredients. But those without regret can forward their creations to the conveyor belt, assuming there is room, which will create a new sushi object. Now the thing about the conveyor belt is it's actually just a list of data, and any new sushi is simply added to the top of that list. Visually, this is reflected on the conveyor belt from the top left and circling to the bottom left. But there were two issues. Our list is not a loop, and that loop is almost not always full. So first, any sushi that's at the end of the list goes through a check. If no new sushi is being added to the belt, we simply push that sushi data back to the front, thus creating the illusion of a loop. However, if sushi is being added, we obviously can't loop, so the NP stays at the end and we check the rest of the loop for an empty space. The first space found is deleted and everything is moved forward to continue the illusion. And this system allows the player to populate the conveyor belt with as much sushi as possible, and the logic will automatically adjust to compensate. Which was such a pain in the neck to figure out. Like, for some reason I was having the hardest time trying to make this happen. Like, so much so that this bit of logic was rewritten at least 3 times. And you know, logic dictates that if you enjoy my content, supporting me on Patreon is the best way to help me keep making it. Logic also dictates that doing so can get you access to exclusive content and downloads, and even early access to the weekly Dev Diary videos before they're released on YouTube. Now, while all that logic is going on, customers are constantly pouring into the establishment. But don't worry, only 5 are ever active at one time. Their population is similar to the sushi, except the code will check for any position and just spawn a customer there. And each customer is spawned with 3 wants: a meat, whether they want rice, and how long they are willing to wait before leaving. When the player triggers the conveyor belt, this will also begin a sequence of events. First, this is where each piece of sushi shifts to the next position on the conveyor belt. But this is also where we have our customers potentially grab their dishes. And for the sake of, I guess, simplicity, customers will only grab dishes that are set in front of them. So if said dish manages to match their criteria for meat and rice, the dish is removed, the customer is removed, and the player is paid for their service. Now overall, the player only has 2.5 minutes to serve as many customers as possible. Once the timer runs out, the day is over and the player can try again. And at this point, I know what you're thinking. This is hardly like Super Hot at all. Well, originally there was a lot more planned. For example, there were meant to be levels of rawness to the meat, and instead of timers that ran in real time, everything was based on steps. But these were either changed or removed for both dev time and gameplay flow. The initial goal was to create a strategy game of sorts, where the player assesses the customer's needs and then builds to satisfy as many as possible in as few clicks as possible. But that type of gameplay takes time and knowledge that I just did not have. Especially after having to spend so much of it working on the conveyor belt loop logic. But in general, I'd been waiting on making this project because, like a lot of my projects, it's been difficult to think of ways to keep things fresh, you know? And more than just an interesting mechanic / concept. Like maybe having progression allows for larger belts, or more complicated recipes. Or maybe bringing back the strategy aspect and doubling down on that approach is the best idea. I don't know. So what do you think? What would be the best way moving forward on this one? Strategy game? Real time? Something completely different? That Tony Hawk Pro Skater? I don't know. And you know what would make for a good incentive to encourage progression? Leave any and all thoughts and ideas in the comments. And while you're at it, if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to leave a like. But with that said, brings us to the end of today's Dev Diary, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.